Are you ready for part 2?
No, but let's go. I'm not a person of living in the extremes, but I like to study the extremes. I think more and more we should do our research to find ways to solve problems, real problems. It's difficult to think about cities without water infrastructures in different forms. I really believe that what is in the center of these nature-based solutions is just a science or an application. Different people call the same thing different things. It's better to do something simple than to ignore. I believe at one point the uncertainty will be so high that we start questioning ourselves.
That is João Leitão, Senior Researcher at the Swiss Federal Institute of Aquatic Science and Technology Eawag, Professor at ETH Zurich, and the first guest of the Grand Challenges podcast. Joao is active in the areas of urban flood risk, urban water asset management, GIS, data-driven and machine learning models. Together with his research group, he has been leveraging new and emerging data sources to develop knowledge and tools to tackle the challenges of too much as well as too little water, emphasizing its central role in helping our cities to combat the impacts of climate change and an uncertain future. My name is Peter Marcus Bach, and this is the Grand Challenges podcast, a show about inspiring individuals who are stepping up to tackle the global challenges that our world is facing in their own unique ways. We reflect on the many out-of-the-box ways our guests have navigated the complexity and intricacies of the environment at the cutting edges of science, engineering, technology, and design. On today's show, Joao returns for part 2, where we reflect not only on our memories of the show's first episode, but also discuss his ongoing work with his team in the fields of urban heat mitigation, urban drainage asset management, including blue-green infrastructures, data scarcity, and data-driven models. We also hear an update on where Joao is heading with his research on the extremes in future, and what this may look like in a changing global landscape. Detailed information is provided in the show notes over at petermbach.com/podcast. Thank you for joining us today, and please enjoy the show.
Welcome back, Joao.
Thank you, Peter. What a challenge being here the second time. I need to think about more stories to tell.
Well, you were my very first guest, and now that we've reached episode 40, I thought, well, why not bring Joao back on the show? Your episode was very popular, and I got so many people telling me how much they enjoyed your stories of the Azores and all the other things that we spoke about. And I think it's time, after 2.5 years since we last spoke, and the podcast being 2 years old, I figured at some point, let's bring in Joao again.
So are you telling me that people find my stories more interesting than my research, or?
Now, all the stories about your life and the research.
I know.
And at the end of the day, it's all interconnected anyway. So
That's true. It was really nice to say a few things about Portugal during the first episode. Some experiences. There's much more to say about Portugal. And also 2 years ago, and 2 years of research is also lots of new experiences, new studies, new ideas.
Including some areas that we never actually covered in the first episode.
Exactly.
So definitely a good opportunity. But I think, best place to start is reflecting on the first episode. I listened to it last night in preparation for this. And I thought to myself, oh, wow, it's been 2 years, and I think some of my styles have changed since then. But I think for the better. I think you're improving day by day. But what were some of your impressions when you first listened to your episode? And it was my first attempt at editing a podcast.
Well, for me, first reaction was, wow, this sounds really, really nice. High quality audio, nice talk. I was not entirely convinced with my stories, I have to say, but it sounds as a serious, and it is a serious podcast series now, which I'm really happy to be part of it. I don't want to say, well, it was the first one. Someone had to be the first one, so it was me. But lots of interesting, valuable stories, experience from different people and different areas. So very well done, Peter.
No, thank you. And I guess they always say you are your own worst critic. I was listening to it and I thought, geez, I could have spoken better. I could have articulated better. I think the very first intro into your episode after I said hi to you, I was literally blanking because I was like, how do I go from here? It's like I just got as far as hello.
Yeah. But following what you're saying is, for me, is a little bit challenging because you made this exercise of looking back. I didn't. And I'm afraid now to see how this talk will look like and compare this thing to the one 2 years ago. So I'm getting a little bit nervous.
As a callback to the first episode, I think it's only fair that we start with the same thing that we started with back in the first episode, which is none other than salted cod.
This is very common to Portuguese people, as I mentioned, and as you heard from me. I'm also happy that you have our opportunity to try it more than once.
Indeed. And actually, in fact, last Christmas, we were over at your place, my wife and I, and you gave us yet another beautiful salted cod recipe. And that's so bacalhau, for those who probably were wondering what we were talking about. And apparently we learned that you have 100+ recipes for that in your cookbook or in your repertoire, but that there's said to be over 1,000 recipes for this in Portugal alone.
Yeah, it is true. You talk to some Portuguese people and they know at least 2-3 ways on how to prepare the bacalhau, the salted cod. And of course, everyone has the preference, the one recipe that is best. And I cannot say that because I really enjoyed it in multiple facets and multiple ways of being prepared and cooked.
So you really don't have a preference? I would have thought it would be the one in the olive oil bath that you served me the very first time I came over.
This is one of the top ones. And yeah, I have to say, one of my top preferences for salted cod is a very simple recipe. Boiled salted cod with boiled chickpeas. And that's it.
Chickpeas. Okay. I guess it gives it a bit more of a heaviness to it.
Yes. And it's kind of traditional Portuguese dish, heavy, with, of course, with olive oil.
Of course. We can't forget that.
No. But it's really one of my preferences. And it's very easy to prepare, I have to say.
I must visit you more often so that we can go through your repertoire. And, if you want, we can do a bit of a tag team. You come over to our place, give us some of the recipes. You probably have to supply us the cod as well.
Yeah.
And then we'll try.
That's good. Yeah. That's a good, it's a deal. Let's make it happen.
And we'll do a podcast about the 100+ salted cod recipes. I think that's a great idea.
A long one, I believe.
Probably. But one other aspect about Portuguese cuisine and culture was also that for whatever reason, over the last Christmas periods, my wife and I have been getting lots of Portuguese wine. I don't know why, but it's been going on sale everywhere. We brought you a bottle, and actually on New Year's, we also had a bottle of Segredos de São Miguel, and very, very nice, smooth, and also just very flavorful wine.
Yes. I just want to make a link to the first episode. São Miguel is the largest island of the Azores.
Yeah.
But the São Miguel in this wine is not the São Miguel from the Azores.
Of course.
Yeah. But it's interesting to see the São Miguel in many other places. Yeah. It's a Saint Michael, right?
Yeah. And something else related to that is Cork, Portugal. And this was something I noticed when I went to the World Expo back in, actually, it was in 2020, but that was COVID, so it was 2021. And I went to the Portuguese pavilion, and there was an entire room with just giant cork seats. And when I looked into it, I realized Portugal is the largest producer of cork in the world. 60% of the volume of all exports come from Portugal.
Yes, I knew that was the largest producer. I didn't know the number. And what you say, it just creates a question on my mind. It is, why is Portugal the largest producer of cork in the world, being a relatively small country in Europe? I don't have an answer for that. Cork trees take quite a long time to grow.
Okay.
Once they are adult trees, they produce cork every 8 years, I believe.
Okay.
Something along these lines.
Yeah.
But why not in other countries invest in cork production? I don't know. Or is something that comes from the past and people are just now making or having the benefit of these trees already there in the past? I don't know. But I'm curious now to try to learn why Portugal is such a large producer of cork.
I'm glad that I made you curious and that I was able to bring up something that got you thinking about your own country. So
I knew it, but I don't know why. Or maybe there was someone who really invested in planting cork trees, mostly in the south, I believe. I don't know why.
Something to think about. Maybe that's something we can revisit on a part 3 at some point.
Yep. Let me just add something to the cork tree. Yeah. These trees are very special for the Portuguese climate because they are fire resistant because of the cork. So something that we should also look at, having the right tree species for the right climate.
True. I remember there was one story that you told me about your family inheriting several trees or one tree.
Yeah, one funny episode related to cork trees, that my father inherited a cork tree, one cork tree, only one, planted among a few hundred cork trees.
Okay.
in a land that does not belong to my family or to my father or to my grandfather.
Okay.
So basically, my father inherited this cork tree in no man's land among many other cork trees. And after inheriting this thing, we have no clue where this cork tree is. We know the area, but there are so many cork trees. We are not experts. We don't know which one is the one from my father.
So to illustrate this, apparently someone bought land probably who knows how many centuries ago, and then they had a community which planted trees and people owned the individual trees.
I think the story is the community itself bought land,
Uh-huh.
a big parcel of land, and they divided the land in different parcels.
Mm-hmm.
One for cork trees, another one for pine trees for construction, another one for olive trees.
Uh-huh.
I think this is more or less the story. I'm not sure about this thing. And then they would divide the trees and the parcels with olive trees and the cork trees. Well, people had to buy these shares of these trees. And then, my grandfather had this one cork tree that we now don't know which one this tree is.
I mean, he didn't write his name on it?
Well, we could, but then every 7 or 8 or 9 years, the cork is removed.
Yeah, that's
so
true.
then the name is will go away.
So that's an ongoing saga. You're trying to find it every time you're there.
I think
you just gave it up.
We gave up, yeah. I think we believe that some people now going there regularly to remove the cork from the tree.
Okay.
Yeah, basically we abandoned, we don't know which one is ours. And we are glad that someone is making use of the cork. Let's put it this way.
Yeah, which is always good.
Yeah.
But I certainly will never look at cork the same way again after hearing some of your stories on it.
This one is funny, I think, because getting as inheritance a cork tree or a tree in the middle of similar liked trees after a couple of generations, we lose this thing.
I mean, normally you inherit, I don't know, houses or cars or things like that, but a cork tree.
Yeah, but this is, very close to a family, but it is not a unique case. I know at least one other case in a different family with some friends that olive trees have been also inherited that are planted in a land that belongs to someone else. It's a little bit strange arrangement, but it's not common, but it's not unique.
Yeah. No, very, very fascinating, very interesting, I guess, culture. And I have yet to visit Portugal. I mentioned on a previous episode not long ago that my to-travel list is growing even more. But yeah.
Yeah, let's, we've been discussing this thing. Let's make it happen.
Yes, let's drive there together.
Yeah.
I know you do that a lot when you drive to Lisbon or Castelo Branco. So
wow, yes, Peter. Surprised.
So at some point, my pronunciation?
It's good. Yeah. Castelo Branco, yeah.
So at some point, maybe a road trip is in order.
Good.
And you can guide me.
Let's plan it.
Sounds good.
Let's have it done soon.
No, definitely. And then I can come back with olive oil as well.
Lots of,
which is a common occurrence when you drive there.
Yeah, it's so my family, my parents have some few dozens of olive trees.
Yeah.
And then they do this thing as a hobby.
Yeah.
And then when we drive, we are lucky to bring a couple of large bottles with olive oil.
Yeah. And then you can use them, such as in the Bacalhau recipe.
True. And it feels good because it's something that my parents do it really with passion. And then we'll bring part of the Portuguese tradition here for our dinners and with friends and so on.
Yeah. So getting to more, I guess, scientific topics, even though the science of olive oil making can be quite intricate from what I saw on my trip to Greece. But I guess first things in order, congratulations on becoming professor at ETH.
Ah, okay. I almost forgot about this thing. This was last year. Yes, correct, Peter. Thank you very much.
Since you last came on, and that's one of the biggest things that's happened. And I think that is a testament to the work you've been doing and also just the diversity of the work and the impact that your work is also showing.
Well, thanks a lot for the kind and nice words. It is an achievement, yes. It is nice to see how people look into the things we are doing. It's also interesting to see that it was a long process and lots of unknown people to me that were involved in assessing the research statement, the CV, the teaching statements, and so on. And then at the end, apparently, everyone was happy with my application. So then I'm glad. And this is the kind of a little bit of a recognition of the work we've been doing. And I have to say, it has been part of it as well, Peter, as you know.
And I've really enjoyed our collaboration over the last few years. That certainly hasn't stopped. And I think some of the topics that we spoke about for this episode actually relate to some of the things we've done in the past few years as well. So no, it's been a pleasure to be along for the journey and to keep collaborating, which I know will happen going forward as well.
That's good.
And so we spoke about flooding last time. Actually, I've been able to, learn a flood model or two under your tutelage. So thank you for that. It's been actually quite fun to watch the water just flow, and normally not something to be happy about when you see things get flooded, but I guess it's in the computer, so it's fine.
Yeah, Peter, I used to say something when I talk about flooding and the things we do, or I do, regarding flood modeling and so on. I'm one of the few persons on earth then when a flood happens has a smile on the face. Of course, understanding that as people being impacted, it's not nice, but at least it's an opportunity for us to collect some data and to better understand the phenomenon.
I guess they say it's, you can conceptualize, you can theorize it all you want, but sometimes when it actually happens, that's when the knowledge really gets put to the test.
True. And my work has been really on the technical side, so modeling on the physical phenomena and so on. But I think more and more we should do our research to find ways to solve problems, real problems.
Yeah.
And by better understanding the phenomena, we could or we should be better prepared to really solve these problems and help people's lives, help people surviving or dealing with these natural hazards.
No, definitely. And the last time we talked a lot about data-driven models, how you are using machine learning to try and help us, better simulate floods. You've looked at social media and trying to use that as alternative data sources to understand flood water depths. But I understand you've been recently going a bit more into other aspects, such as the drainage infrastructure itself, understanding how we can go about with the data relating to that, and also the rainfall, which is just as much important as the surface.
Okay, let's start from the rainfall. This is kind of a result of a collaboration with a colleague that we both know. Nadav Pelek is currently at the University of Lausanne and is, I would say, a specialist on hydrology and rainfall modeling. And one of the aspects that we've done together was to understand how the future projections of rainfall could impact or could increase or decrease the flooding impacts. Because we know or we believe, based on modeling scenarios and so on, that in many places in the world, the intensity of the rainfall is likely to increase in the future due to climate changes and so on. But how would this increase in rainfall intensity, how would this translate into the impacts of flooding?
Yeah.
If we want into the flooding risk. And this was a study that we've done for cities in Switzerland. So we tested one of the fancy methods to account for increase of temperature, for future climate scenarios and so on rainfall intensity. Nadav's method, and we compared to more traditional methods to increase rainfall intensity. And we came out with the conclusion that, yes, some of the methods that have been used are too simple. So they don't account for everything that is happening in rainfall. Spatial distributed rainfall is also an important aspect when we want to account for floods, even if they are localized, like in pluvial flood events. So it's important when we look into the future that we make use of the more or most advanced tools that we have at our hand.
So in a way, you've uncovered or debunked some, simplifications that we shouldn't be using nowadays. One being simply scaling the rainfall and the other one being the rainfall in space. I mean, as an engineer, sometimes it's very common to grab the rainfall data from the nearest station to then run in their own models. But from what I'm hearing, that spatial distribution can be quite important at the end. So it will start raining on one side of the city or one side of your catchment. And as it moves, things change. And if you don't account for that, you're in trouble.
Yes, you're right, Peter. This was not the conclusion of our study because other studies, other groups have showed this thing, that the spatial distribution of rainfall is also important for localized rainfall events, for relatively small areas of the catchment. What was important was that with the Nadav's tool or rainfall model, we could look into future rainfall, taking also into account the spatial distribution of the rainfall, not only the scaling factor. But here I have to say something which maybe I mentioned this thing in the first episode, I don't remember. It's better to do something simple than to ignore the fact that perhaps the intensity of rainfall in the future will increase. So I'm not saying that we should not use simple methods or models. Yes, we should, but they are already now available more complex models that will represent what can happen in the future in a much more high fidelity way.
It's a nice philosophy because that's also how I approach when I advise on the topic of blue-green infrastructures, which we'll get into shortly because we've been doing lots there. But there are lots of methods out there, lots of quantitative approaches. I think you need to begin with the simple methods just to even have an understanding of the ballpark. Where are you at? And then from there, never stop. You must refine if you can and if resources and time allow, because I guess the more you refine, the less surprises you end up with later on once the infrastructure is implemented or once the policy or measure is implemented.
Yep. Plus, we can also look into this modeling exercise as a journey, right? We can start simple.
Yeah.
As almost as simple as we can imagine. And then we increase the complexity, which means increasing simulation time, increase the need for data and so on. We can keep moving in this direction. And I believe at one point, the uncertainty will be so high that we start questioning ourselves. Is it really worth it, this complexity? And then this is perhaps the point that we should stop here and reconsider what we've been doing.
The sweet spot, so to say.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's been on the rainfall side. And in a way, you're adding to the evidence that we should be considering these variables because they will affect it. Climate change, I think, pretty much shows us we're not, in one side going towards fully dry or fully wet. It's more a shift in extremes and an increase in extreme events that we have to be prepared for.
Exactly. Also, recently, I was talking with someone, I think Peter van Hollegem, that I'm looking to floods, but also droughts will become something to look at from the hydrological perspective. I just like to mention here something that one of the PG students in my group have been doing or has been doing is trying to understand if there's a sweet spot regarding model complexity and data quality or data resolution. Her name is Fabrizia Fapiano. She will finish, I think, the PG soon. And she was really poor her, in the sense that she had to run so many simulations with different models. Was not an easy task, I believe. But the outcome showed that exactly what I said before. Maybe there's a point as more complex models do not bring necessarily better results. And I think this is a very, very interesting study from Fabrizio.
Definitely. And I remember my own supervisor, Anna, who's also been on the show, she would refer to it as running the model to death.
Almost. Poor Fabrizia. Just a little bit before.
Yeah. There's a group in the US that does a lot of models. They do population simulations, combat simulations, those kinds of things, and they call it massive scenario generation.
Yeah, this is following this study from Fabrizia, which is kind of try to be as comprehensive as possible, giving the limitation of time and computational resources and different models and so on. She then moved on to include not only the technical modeling aspects, but also to include aspects about vulnerability to flooding.
Interesting.
And solutions on how to solve or mitigate flooding issues. And these also relates to the blue-green infrastructure or nature-based solutions that you just mentioned before.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I haven't asked this for a long time on the show, but what is your preferred term for blue-green infrastructures?
I don't have a preference. But I can elaborate a little bit on two: BGI, blue-green infrastructure, and NBS, nature-based solutions. What I like on the nature-based solutions is that they are engineered solutions based on nature. And it makes sense to me. For the blue-green infrastructure, what I like about it is that it is an infrastructure. And it should be looked at as an infrastructure. And then this triggers something about maintenance, monitoring, which is nature-based solutions is less obvious, although it's the same, right? It's an infrastructure. What I don't like much about the blue-green is that sometimes we have solutions that are only green. Sometimes we have solutions that are only blue. And this aspect is a little bit blurred on the nature-based solutions. It's everything or can be everything.
Yeah. And then I guess there's always a confusion. If there's a pipe in there, is it still nature-based or not? Or is it gray infrastructure?
Well, we have channels in nature, right?
Yeah.
Rivers and so on.
That is true.
So, yeah, we engineered a channel and become a canal or a pipe or something. So in that sense, it's also based on nature. We are just draining or transporting water from one place to the other or helping water to move from A to B.
Yeah.
It's still a nature-based solution with part of gray infrastructure. Yes, correct. And the BGI is also, I like the infrastructure term there.
No. And in a way that also comes back to, one of your passions in the work you do, which is urban drainage asset management, which is about maintaining the infrastructure.
Yes, this is true. This is one of the lectures I have the possibility to teach at TTH, and I really like it because these are key infrastructures in cities. It's difficult to think about cities without these water infrastructures in different forms. Could be more centralized, less centralized, and they are still infrastructures. This is interesting. This is something that I brought from my 3.5 years after the PhD in Lisbon at LNEC. And more recently, we've been trying to think about blue-green infrastructure as infrastructure that also do need maintenance, monitoring, understanding how the hydrological performance evolves over time. And this leads to the PhD of Prabhat Joshi, also a PhD student in my group, that is trying really to look into this thing. How do the performance of these infrastructure evolve over time? In a similar way that we've been thinking for the last 15 years, 20 years about pipes and pumps also degrade over time. And we do need to understand how do they fail, how do they degrade, plan replacement procedures, and so on. But my impression is that we just build a rain garden or a pond, and it's done, it's there.
There's a certain set it and forget it mentality. Yeah.
And I think if we want to make use of the functions of these infrastructure, we need to keep in mind that they are built based on some design criteria, but we don't know if these design criteria are met after 5, 10, 15, 20 years' time. So this is one of the more recent aspects that I've been looking to this infrastructure asset management.
Yeah. And do initial insights allow you to make a comparison how this compares to your traditional drainage, so your pits and pipes and overflows?
We don't know yet because there's all these questions need data. And there's not much data available, monitoring data about the hydrological performance of this infrastructure.
Yeah.
One of the things that, so we set up a research question, a goal, and Prabhat said, I would like to develop a method to understand if BGI A still performs as it was designed or when it was built. First challenge.
Yeah.
How do we compare it? Because a rainfall that is happening in year 2010 when it was built, the same shape, the same intensity, the same duration will most likely not occur in 2020 or 2025. So in that sense, it was the big challenge. I think Prabhat solved this thing.
Yep.
But the amount of data available is quite limited. So we cannot yet say, I think, yes, this the BGI of type A evolves this way or evolves that way. We believe, and what we want to show or to develop or to propose is that a method that can show that it doesn't work as it was designed. Maybe it works better, even better.
That would be great.
Yeah, exactly. But at least we could tell the decision makers, the people responsible for this infrastructure, something has changed.
Yeah.
Have a look at it.
And I guess that's the problem with these kinds of systems in terms of you have to be prepared for variety because there's no one-size-fits-all solution. We've heard that many times on the show. But also, it is a natural system with so many processes going on. Vegetated systems in particular will also have different processes from the plants, from the root systems. You never know how much water it's getting, but yeah.
The context, the climate, for example, we have very little control on.
Yep.
Will have an impact on how this infrastructure will evolve over time. Plus, as you mentioned, do we irrigate more? Do we irrigate less? The species of the plants can be different in Switzerland than in Brazil, in São Paulo, for example. So there are many possible combinations of all these aspects. And then it will be, I believe, difficult to say this type of BGI will evolve this way or that way.
Yeah.
So our focus is more, let's propose something, let's develop something that we can at least show that something has changed to highlight, then if something has changed, we may need to do something to increase the performance, or we're happy then performance is higher for something, but then we can go back and then learn what is different from the first moment that was implemented. And then since that learning, we can improve the performance from day zero.
And I guess countries exchanging information and learning from each other as well, because even though climate's different, species of plants may be different, I think at the end of the day, certain processes will still be similar.
Yeah. Peter just mentioned something that is really relevant. And here at Eawag, we are looking into that. Particularly myself, I'm looking into ways of having large data sets of flood data, modeling or real data. But more broadly, for example, Jörg Rickerman and the group or the project Coidu Labs, funded by the European Union, were trying to understand if it's possible, if people find value in having an harmonized data structure, data format, so that we can then easily exchange data among researchers, practitioners from different locations and so on. And if we really want to take advantage of data-driven models, we really need to find out ways to really start exchanging the data.
And collating it, collecting it, and just having it at your disposal so you can train these models in the first place. Yeah.
Definitely. And it's, you mentioned collating, but also curating the data.
True.
Because all data sets, for obvious reasons, will have errors, gaps, and so on. Yeah. And we need to find ways. And perhaps in our field, we need to learn from other fields on how to fill the gaps, get rid of some outliers, and so on, or identify errors in the data.
Yeah, anomalies
and so on.
No, definitely. And hopefully, with Coidu Labs being a big example in the urban drainage field, many other things catch on. There are quite a few websites nowadays that are collating a lot of nature-based solutions, projects, information as a means of sharing as well to the world. So I think we're going to see this a lot more often in the future. And it's something that we definitely should be pursuing and trying to harmonize, as you said. That's probably often the most challenging part, because people collect data differently.
Yep, and what we've seen in the Coidu Labs is that different people call the same thing different things. And then this creates a challenge when we look into a data set. Is it depth or water level? And then we are, on top of this thing, we have the units, right? Mm-hmm. Should be the same units, or at least should be clear which units we are using.
Yeah.
So it's a challenge. It's a data management, data curation thing.
I guess another pet peeve that gets you a bit worked up is when people start using the terms flood resilient, flood risk very loosely.
Yes. I tend to be very strict to flood risk or to risk in general, because people tend to use flood hazard, flood risk, flood almost the same way.
Yeah.
And I really think that the risk is more than the hazard. For sure, it's more than the hazard. And involves vulnerability, exposure, and so on. Frequency or probability or likelihood. And then when we look into, in many cases, not always, about things, maps, flood risk, they actually are flood hazard maps, not flood risk. Because the part on the impact, the real impact is not there. It's just the hazard, water depth, for example. But we will get there slowly.
I think it's important, at least going forward, to be very precise. I think when we articulate ourselves, especially when we're communicating in research, to avoid that confusion later on.
Completely agree. And then if the community agrees and start using the terms that the community agrees, not me saying what should be used, this makes the communication also easier. It's like urban drainage or stormwater management.
True.
Very much the same or has some big overlaps, but sometimes it's understood completely different way.
I remember being made fun of in school for this quote, but I think it's even more real nowadays. I tended to say it's exactly the same, but only different. And then realized myself how silly that quote was. But actually, it's coming to light now.
Yeah, it applies there. Yeah. It applies everywhere else, or in many places at least.
No, definitely. And so cases of too much water, cases of lots of infrastructure, cases of blue-green infrastructures for stormwater management, but one completely different area, which you've already hinted out, the right species for the right locations, but also not just water abundance, but droughts that has come into the forefront of the research for both of us. Actually, a project we've been doing together has been on the topic of urban heat. And we've had Lucas Gobati on the previous episode telling us a bit about that work, but I guess there's been a lot more to that. And I suppose one of the nice moments that we can reflect on to kick off this topic is how we managed to use time zones to our advantage in writing a proposal along this topic.
Yeah, it's a nice story with a nice end, at least regarding getting the funding.
Yeah.
But I remember that you were not here in Switzerland.
I was in Australia at the time.
Exactly. And then we managed to work on the proposal almost 24 hours a day.
Pretty much. And really in tandem. So you did your part And then I just continued from there. And in the transition periods when I was about to go to sleep and you were just waking up, we were just discussing what needed to be done.
Yeah, it was, first of all, it was a very nice personal experience regarding working with you and putting together the proposal and so on. But it also reflects how connected the world is nowadays.
Yeah.
And I think we as individuals, but also as communities, should also think about taking advantage of these possibilities nowadays.
Definitely.
And this was really, for me, one of the clear things or events that really showed, okay, it's nice to have this technology around, and then we can really make it happen almost 24 hours a day.
No, definitely. And the convenience of it. And just, I guess it made it fun. It made it exciting because you would wake up and hoping to see something new, and then you'd be excited, open your computer with your morning coffee, and you see that something has changed.
It's a live thing. It's really a live document. It's even if when you go to sleep, it's still something happens there.
I guess with a 10-hour time difference, or actually at the time it was 8 hours, but still Zurich and Melbourne, pretty far apart. It just worked. So use the time to advantage.
Exactly. Yeah. Of course, this is not new, right? The big financial centers are Tokyo, or some of the big financial centers, Tokyo, New York, and London, right?
Yeah.
And they somehow cover the 24 hours or the 8-hour shifts during that 24 hours day.
Well, I guess quoting you from the first episode, it made us feel like there were actually 48 hours in the day, right?
Yeah. Did I say that?
You did.
Yeah, but sometimes...
in passing, but yes.
Yeah. Sometimes I do have this feeling. There's so many things happening, good things, that the day feels like has 24 hours, which is not a bad thing.
Yeah. I guess it forces you to be a bit more efficient.
Oh, yeah. This is also, maybe this happens to everyone, but nowadays with all this technology around and the possibilities that it creates, like online meetings and so on, I think one of the challenges is being efficient, which is not necessarily an easy thing because we jump from one meeting to the other. And then there's lots of distractions here and there.
Yeah.
This is the negative side. But as I said previously, I think there's lots of good things about it as well. Lots of opportunities that 10 years ago we wouldn't have.
I guess we should be appreciative that there's only 24 hours because there's this famous law, Parkinson's law, that says, the work will expand to fill the time allotted for its completion. So I think we might have taken longer to write this ground if there were 48 hours.
Mm-hmm. So, Peter, are you saying that we should close the podcast now?
No. We haven't even gotten into the heat topic. And,
I know.
Although I think this whole discussion and this beautiful reflection is also just an excuse for us to, completely hide the fact that I think we were, just like many other researchers commonly, rushed to the very end and doing this in the last minute as well.
It's part of the human being, I think. We know that we have a task to do, and we know the deadline. We know more or less what we need to do, more or less. And then last day or last week, this is where we put the effort and make things to happen, to realize.
Indeed. Our journey on urban heat began actually with a lit review on blue-green infrastructure's ability to cool down cities and to what extent they do, whether they're effective or not.
True. This was a student that we had, that we co-supervised together. So Noemi, props. Noemi was doing some bachelor project or something like that, not even a master's. And we were really interested in the mechanisms of heat mitigation. And then we are lucky enough to have Noemi also engaged and motivated to do such a thing. And we ended up having a nice literature review, I think, together with Max Maurer and Lauren Cook, showing what can work better in different conditions and so on.
Yeah, it was a huge effort. Lots of different kinds of solutions that Noemi reviewed. Noemi, if you're listening to this, awesome work. And yeah, it's been making the rounds across the world as well in its published form.
Yep, well done, Noemi.
But I think it also highlighted we have different solutions for different contexts. We also have solutions that may not necessarily require the infrastructure itself, but actually requires more strategic planning, such as ventilation corridors where you orient the buildings in a way that makes sense so that the wind can pass through it.
Yeah, this was one of the outcomes, I think, of Noemi's study. That on one hand, we do have solutions that we can think of that are obvious. I'm calling them obvious. There are other solutions that are not taking as obvious. And this is for me at least, was highlighted in the study that was conducted by Noemi.
Yeah. And I think one other very important aspect, it also formed part of my philosophy of how I communicate with blue-green infrastructures and ecosystem services, is that water plays a very key role. Without water, vegetation does not grow and thrive properly. I mean, you can have drought-tolerant plants, but if you want to create these kinds of effects, especially urban cooling, you need to have water availability.
Yep. This was really the starting point of the Heat Down project, I would say. And we discussed lots of things. And at the end or in the middle, I said, well, look, Eawag is a water research institute. We should really put the water at the center. Or try to, at least.
Yeah.
And then we ended up having the Heat Down project funded, running now since 2024.
After successful global time zone efficiency.
Yeah, 2023, I think. Not 24, but okay. João and Lucas joined the project as PG students. They've been doing pretty well, I would say. And we've been managing to keep water at the center of the project.
And it's really about water. Where do we source it? How much do we need to irrigate? And this is both in terms of blue-green infrastructures, but also irrigating other aspects. I'll get to that in a minute, because that was something you were so obsessed with at the start of the project in particular. And then also, I guess, learning a bit more about the time dimension of blue-green infrastructures and heat. And so on the one hand, we spoke with Lucas on the previous episode about cooling establishment, that things take time before we see the cooling benefits, but also on the work of João Chen, her modeling has also showed us some very interesting spatial and temporal relationships.
Yeah, João did also the master thesis with us.
Yes.
And out of that study, we could find that different land uses could lead to different cooling requirements, first of all. That, again, linking this thing to the modeling aspect, not necessarily the more complex models would suit the task of identifying the hotspots in a city scale environment. And this was the starting point to try to think about, plus the literature review study, to start thinking about solutions, these blue-green solutions or green solutions that required water. And you mentioned something on species and vegetation species and so on. When we think about drought-tolerant species, they will have very little impact on evaporative cooling because they protect themselves from losing water. And evaporating and evapotranspirating is the mechanism that will influence the cooling of the air. And this was the starting point, these two things, master studies of João plus the review, plus the idea of doing something on heat. Another extreme from flooding. So we joined forces and we created the Heat Down project.
You love your extremes.
Yes. I'm not a person of living in the extremes, but I like to study the extremes. This is true. This is just a kind of a reflection now. And based on this, we created this idea for Heat Down, right?
Yeah. And also on your obsession about a very famous Japanese tradition.
Yeah, I don't know how or when or where. I read about something called the Uchimizu. Sorry if I'm saying something wrong in Japanese.
No, sounds all right. Uchimizu.
Uchimizu, which is apparently a Japanese tradition where during summer, I think, or during hot periods, Japanese water the streets with two main objectives. One is to clean the streets from the dust and so on. And the other one is really to cool the surface temperatures to then cool the environment. And this was one of the triggers for these. So it involves water.
True.
And as I said, I would like to have water in the center of the project. And then we started developing ideas around this thing. So here we are now with an ongoing project for almost 3 years with some outcomes.
Very interesting ones too. Being able to also understand whether a tradition like this, like Uchimizu, can be applied in other cities more actively for heat mitigation.
Yep. This is one of the recent results from João's PhD. She has been busy developing a model to mimic or to simulate the application of water on impervious surfaces. And then based on this, she can start studying different aspects on how to optimize the Uchimizu, the pavement watering. What we could see from these simplified attempts or modeling scenarios that we can reduce air temperature by up to 2 degrees or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is significant when we talk about temperature. It doesn't sound too much, and it will be nice if it was 5 degrees would be better, but these 2 degrees can really have an impact.
Yeah, and 2 degrees is what I've been reading across the literature as well, going into this topic. And I think it's not to be confused with surface temperatures, where you will see much larger reductions, like tree shading will often make like a 8 to 10 degree difference in some cases. What is to be said is with reducing these temperatures, you're also creating a very different thermal environment of the surface, which will then also will provide a prolonged benefit going further into the day.
Yep, I was talking about air temperatures.
Yes.
When we look into surface temperature just by watering the pavement, it's a huge drop. It's 15, 20 degrees that we could see.
Oh, even more, yeah.
So it's substantial. The next step is, how do we water the surface?
Yeah.
In the morning, in the afternoon, during the peak, several times per day, once a day. And this is also what João is trying to find out.
Currently still cooking in the oven.
Yes. So basically, the next step is really an optimization step. So trying to play with different temperatures of the day and different amounts of water, different possibilities to drop or to wet the surfaces, and see in which cases we could get a larger benefit. And this larger benefit is also debatable, and we can discuss. This larger benefit is a larger drop in the peak or a larger average drop in temperature.
Yeah, and it ends up being a trade-off at the end of the day.
At the moment, we are looking into both, and then I think there's a huge opportunity to connect with public health people or colleagues.
Indeed.
To try to understand which one we should aim for first.
And this is something combined with the work that we covered on Lucas's episode. So listeners, if you're interested, refer to episode 39, where we go into some of Lucas's work, which highlights the importance of irrigation, the importance of water availability. This is something that, will progress in the years to come, and hopefully with a follow-on.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So as I said, water is in the center, right? At least at this project. And I really believe that water is in the center of these green infrastructure, nature-based solutions. If we don't have water of whatever source, these green will become yellow or brown.
Yeah.
Towards the end of the project, we'd like to understand how much water do we need to provide to these plants, to these trees, to maximize the air and air cooling benefit.
Yeah, the achievable benefits that we can gain when we have that water. But I guess the other question related to that is where to get the water from.
Exactly. And once we do know how much water plus minus we do need, we will be able to calculate how much would it cost to use potable drinking water. If we live next to a river, if we use river or lake water, how much does it cost to transport the water to the places we do need? And it opens here a big opportunity. Everyone, or many people talk about circular economy. Mm-hmm. What about reusing, recycling, or reusing treated stormwater? And perhaps more interesting, treated wastewater, because it's a water stream that is available all the time. So this will be one of the last steps, I think, of the project, to understand how much it costs in terms of CO2 emissions, for example.
Call it the crowning glory of the project itself.
Let's hope for that.
Yeah, no.
We're not that far from.
We're not that far, but I look forward. And these Lucas and João have been actively on the topic. They've learned so much in the last few years around the topic. I think by now they know more than we do.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. They are the experts. So we're just trying to move them around.
Which I guess is natural for a PhD. You start with knowing less than your supervisor and you progress. And at the end, you should know more than your supervisor. And it's always nice to see when that happens.
If it gets, and I believe we're getting there, I think it will be a success.
Yeah.
Supervision-wise and also as a PhD student.
Yeah. It's always a lovely experience when you mentor new PhD students and you watch them grow over the time.
Yeah.
Makes me remember episode 3 with Martijn Koller. Martijn, if you're hearing this, you know what I mean. So flooding heat. I also noticed you had a paper on landslides. So you're really it was a collaboration, but you're really going for the extremes.
Yeah, this landslide is collaboration. It's really not my topic. It just, my contribution there was more on the risk and more on the GIS, geographic information analysis. Yeah. And which is one of the things that I've done in the past after my, in the up-to-date names, terminology. So I did a Master of Engineering, 5 years Master of Engineering, and then I did a Master of Science for 2 years. And then for the 2 years, I really dedicated to learn about geographic information systems and science. Yeah. And it was really one of the inputs there to try to help managing geographical data. Yeah. And so on.
But I find GIS skills are so crucial nowadays because so much is going spatial. A lot of data are now available spatially let's just look at Switzerland. You can get so many different kinds of data sets for GIS, at the click of a button. I mean, where do you think now with changes in, the way we're working with data, with AI, we're heading, and if GIS is still going to be as crucial or perhaps even more important?
Interesting question. I haven't thought about it. So I would say that the methods, the geographic information science or systems are all based on geometry and mathematics. And of course, computationally, we can always improve the computational performance of these methods and perhaps create new ones.
Yeah.
But the big step was on data availability, as you mentioned. And I think together with these data-driven or machine learning models, we can start doing different things in a much more fast way. And I just give an example, right? Generate land use maps. Nowadays, with these computer vision and machine learning algorithms, we can easily classify objects or land uses based on aerial images, which is 30, 40 years ago, it was a more
It was
tedious,
a luxury.
And a tedious work.
Yeah.
So this is where I see it. More data available, it allows us to do things in places that we couldn't do it because that were not there. And we do new things faster.
And I think, as you said, it comes back to the fundamental knowledge. If we remember our geometry and we understand that well, then these methods are just going to evolve into more shapes and forms, but they will never neglect the fundamentals.
Yeah, I don't know if I should say this thing or not, but during my Master of Science defense, so we had a 2 years study. The first year was normal university lectures and classes. And the second year we had a project to finish. And then we had a defense, similar to the PhD defense nowadays. And then I remember it went well, as the defenses usually go. And then one of the questions by an expert on GIS was, is GIS a science or an application or a tool or something like that?
Interesting thought.
And I can tell you that we ended up disagreeing a little bit by that time of the defense, but just different opinions. And for me, I can say I think GIS is more an application, a tool, than a science, because I just hinted before, it's based on mathematical concepts, geographical concepts, geography, and so on.
Yeah.
But it was an interesting discussion, and then I had to stop the thing because this is my master thesis defense. I need to stop here, otherwise I don't know where this thing will end up.
Well, I thought you get brownie points if you are critiquing and you're argumentative.
I don't know. At that context, I thought, I'm getting a little bit nervous now.
Sometimes it's better to just keep silent.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's true. But I've had moments like that. But sometimes I think it's important to really open the can of worms and to think about it. You just got me thinking too.
I think these are the important moments, because I have to admit, I think this is the only question I remember from the top of my head from the master thesis defense.
Okay, interesting.
And the other ones were very interesting for sure, relevant, but this one was the one that really stick to me for
years on, clearly.
a few years. Yeah.
So heat down, still going to go for a bit longer, but we'll be wrapping up that, and we'll have to think of a continuation project. But what's been of interest to you in recent weeks or recent months?
So I'm assuming you're asking about research, or?
Yes. I mean, unless you want to go into Bacalhau recipes.
No. We had enough of these for today, for this episode. I think I would like to go back into modeling aspects, because I think, as we mentioned, data is becoming available in all sorts of forms. And previously, we had challenges in, for example, model calibration.
Yeah.
We started in this direction a couple of years ago, and then I got diverted to other topics. But why not combining different sources of data with different levels of uncertainty or error, and try to make use of these data to better calibrate our models? This is one aspect. The second one, which I also already failed once, but I believe that with collaborations with people, experts on machine learning and deep learning and data-driven and AI and so on, I thought that by forcing the data-driven models to be limited based on some physics would increase the accuracy of such models, but I totally failed.
Oh.
And this is something that I would like to go back and give it another try.
I guess they say you have, corpses in the cellar.
Mm-hmm.
Your research becomes corpses in the cellar, and you can go out and dig one up and resurrect it.
Yeah, well, which sometimes is not easy because I know that I failed already, so why to go there again? But let's give some hope for these things, and maybe we were not using the right tools, or now we could look into this same problem from a different angle, and then suddenly we see light. I think it's worth it.
I guess to continue my bad streak of analogies so far, I guess you can breathe new life into it.
Yes, that's a good one.
Yeah, see, at least I hopefully redeemed myself. Listeners, yes. If you're face palming, let me know. Joao, I've asked you all the questions from the previous set of questions, but I think in preparation for your return, I did prepare a new set. And listeners, you may have noticed I've started changing up some of the questions that I ask all my guests. And I guess it's a good opportunity to get into those a bit. And I guess one question that has been asked to many guests, but you actually were never asked because I only introduced it in the 6th episode, is the magic wand question. So if you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about the world we're in, about the current situation that we're in, what would you change and why?
I think this is a very difficult question because, first of all, I don't have this power.
If you had this power?
If I had this power, I would most likely use the power to help something related to health. Mm-hmm. It's not my field, but for me, the person is really the center of everything. And someone without health, it will have big trouble ahead of him or her. So if I was giving this power, I would use this power to really try to help find the solution for something. What comes to my mind now is cancer-related issues. Mm-hmm. Also something related to antibiotic resistance that perhaps we may face a big challenge in a few decades, hopefully centuries, or not even face it. But I would perhaps really use this power to make some breakthrough in a medicine, something important.
I guess new medicines or treatment styles.
Yeah. Ways of living that would avoid people getting into these situations.
Yeah. I notice we're seeing a resurgence of, many people advocating for healthy living, more preventative ways of, creating health rather than reactive approaches. Very similar to how we think as engineers as well. We try to be more preventive compared to reactive.
Yeah, I'm definitely not an expert on these. What I can say and then really intrigues me, and then I find it interesting. So I read something about this thing. I don't know if it's true or not, but that we can ask Jishuan. That some thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago in China, people would pay the doctor while they were healthy.
Oh.
And they would stop paying the doctor if something bad happened with the health.
Interesting.
And this is interesting. This is an interesting concept. I believe that in China is not like this anymore. But it's an interesting concept. So
very interesting.
Motivate people to keep you healthy.
Yeah. I guess incentives done in a different way, but in a way that makes sense. Yeah. That's proactive, not reactive.
Yeah. And I don't know how to implement this thing nowadays, I have to admit, but it's a good mindset, a good way of thinking, or perhaps could be a good way of thinking with lots of negative aspects, I believe.
Yeah. I guess when you think about Switzerland, you have the obligatory health insurance. In a way, it takes a certain form like that, wouldn't you say?
But you have to pay in addition with when you have
the unfortunate reality. Yeah. But essentially, in a way, safeguarding.
Yeah, it is. I see your point is trying to make sure as best as we know and as we can to stay healthy.
But I suppose in reference to what you just mentioned, and we definitely have to speak to Jishwan about that for the show notes especially. In a way, I think it puts a responsibility on the doctor to ensure the person stays healthy. Yeah. And whereas this is more passive, what I just mentioned.
Exactly. It's a team thing. It's not only the doctor, it's not only the person. It has to be the two together aiming for something that it's good for the person. So this would be my power.
Yeah. Certainly very nice use of the wand. Haven't heard of that on the show before. So we've heard very many varieties of uses.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. In your view, what does the word innovation truly mean, and how has it shaped the way you approach challenges or opportunities in your work?
Well, the definition of innovation is really trying to bring research into practice somehow, knowledge into something.
Into application,
Application. And my education background as an engineer is a lot of looking to challenges or problems and try to find ways to solve it. So I think, or I hope, that most of the things that we do in our field is really about innovation. In many cases, we do have climate changes, urbanization challenges, floods, droughts, asset management. We mention all of these things here and many other. And then we try to make the best use of our knowledge to solve these things. So then when you ask me, what does it truly mean? For me, it's really also a daily business. We think about possible challenges and we try to apply the best we know or the best we can develop or invent to sort out or to fix a problem or to face a challenge.
Yeah. I like the way you phrase it, knowledge to application or research to practice. I think researchers also often forget that is also just as much an important aspect, because you can write the best paper, you can write the most interesting work, but if it doesn't see, use eventually, then it's also a bit of a pity, because the work is surely very interesting and could be implemented. And I feel like we should encourage everyone to take that extra step to try and use it in some form in practice, or to at least create visibility for it in practice.
I think this is what you just mentioned, is this visibility or this potential for application visible.
Yeah.
In a paper, in a talk, something. How can we make this knowledge applicable here, there? There's many things that we can think of. Also, many disciplines in research, right, that apply. Medicine, for example. Again, engineering, these, and also these cross collaborations between disciplines, engineering, medicine, and so on. How can we make this knowledge to improve whatever we want to think of?
The people.
The people,
lives.
Yeah, the lives. This is, again, the center of where I think we should look at.
Yeah, without forgetting, I guess, the environment that supports us as well. What is your favorite childhood memory?
This interview or this recording, the first episode, happened 1.5 years ago or 2 years ago. 2.5 years ago. And it feels like it was in my childhood.
Oh, wow.
No. Seriously, I really, as I said at the beginning, I feel a little bit that I'm privileged to be here, to have started this journey on the podcast. And perhaps it's not the most interesting one. I hope it's a little bit funny one, as I said. But it's for sure has been a quite long journey for you preparing all these episodes, and really, really nice stuff.
It's been a real learning experience and just something I can look back on very proud of. And yeah, it's fun when you listen to the first episode and then you listen to the 39th, 40th, even just somewhere in the middle, how you change the way you edit, change the way you use intro and outro songs. It's just so exciting.
Yeah, I can see, because we recorded this thing in a normal living room, let's call it like that.
With a lot of laundry hanging around as sound barriers.
And then we ended up being here today with headphones, microphones in a studio room.
Admittedly, the microphones are still the same from last time. It's we found more resources.
That's good.
Thank you, Eawag.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a nice one. I do miss sea in Switzerland, the sea. Okay. And one of the earlier memories I have from childhood is not really an exciting thing or something. It's a rather contemplative memory, which is being in a balcony in a hotel, which is right at the sea, right at the beach. And at night, see the small lights of the small fishing boats fishing octopus.
Okay.
And it's kind of a peaceful image that I have from my childhood. It's quiet. Everything is... that place used to be much less busy than it is now. And very little things would happen. And then this image of the waves, and then the points of the lights in the sea with the small boats. It's something that I do remember pretty well. But not exciting. Sorry, Peter.
Is that something that drew you close to water?
A good question. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think so. I think what brought me close to flooding especially is the impacts these events can have on people on infrastructure.
Yeah.
So this is how I was driven to study this thing.
I guess it's something I can relate to. I mean, growing up in Asia, being on more beach holidays than anywhere else, I feel close to the sea as well. And I was picturing that in my mind as you were describing it, and I can imagine, what a beautiful sight. So yeah, thanks for sharing that memory. So as someone who puts water front and center, people front and center, making sure that we can improve the livelihoods of people with the diversity and the journey you've had, what would you most like to be remembered for?
A very simple person, ethical person who likes to work with people and for people. And this would be enough.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's just very simple. It's just, we just do our small thing. We just put our small brick in the wall and then we'll get there. And if it's, I am who I am, that's it.
So normally I would ask, where can people reach you? But we kind of have that from the first episode, although I'm sure we can add a few new contexts now with your new professorship at ETH, and I guess some updates as well, given you have 2 episodes on the show. But I guess one thing before I completely wrap up, and this is also something I never asked you on the first episode, but you did tell me about it. Could you tell me a basic joke in German?
No, wait. Well, I can. Well, it's not German. It's not in German, but it's using German words.
I guess that makes it better. The listeners can understand even if they don't speak it.
Yes. So basically, and again, my accent is not good, but it's kind of a real joke. There was someone walking with a cup of coffee in the hand. And then an old person approached this person with a coffee cup in the hand and said, Prost. And this person with the coffee in the hand said, okay, Post, just turn right. And the post office is down the road. And basically, this is not a joke in German. And basically, the Prost is just cheers.
Oh, boy.
It was a big scary face on the other side of, no, just Prost, just cheers. Enjoy your coffee. This is kind of a real life joke, but it's a nice one. It's not a joke in German, but it's a joke about German language.
How do you say cheers in Portuguese?
Saúde.
Saúde?
Saúde. Yeah, like health. If you translate word by word, is have health.
Well,
have a healthy moment, have a healthy time. Like salud.
Ah, yes.
Santé in French.
Santé, yeah.
Santé, yeah. It's the same.
Well, when it's time to do a part 3, maybe the third bacalhau recipe is the trigger for that, but when it's time to do a part 3, I will make sure I have wine here, which I was seriously debating of bringing today because of the discussion about Cork, but yeah.
So basically next time we have to go back to the living room to do the recording, because I think we are not allowed to bring food and drinks here.
True. So we'll have to downgrade the studio, but I'm sure by then I have upgraded my audio editing skills.
Exactly.
But certainly, Joao, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here for a second time. Thank you for starting this journey with me. Thank you for continuing this journey with me. It's always been a pleasure to work with you day in, day out, since the day I met you and since the day we started working together. So I look forward to many happy times going forward. And like I said, to that part 3 and the wine.
Yeah. The same thing from my side. And I would, from my side at the moment, I will close this thing saying, Saúde, cheers. Thanks a lot, Peter, for these good moments and good collaborations. Happy collaborations, I have to say. And also the good moments outside the academic or research collaborations. These are also nice talks, important ones, and good times.
And I guess for our listeners, do you have any final message, final words?
Yeah, I don't remember what I said in the last in the previous episode, in my first episode. I would just now say, don't be afraid to risk. Go for it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And that wraps up our nostalgic, enjoyable, and fascinating episode with João Leitão. For more information on cod, cork, and wine, ways to water your pavement, or a collection of German and Portuguese puns to use in your next joke, check out the show notes for more information over at petermbach.com/podcast. And as always, thank you listeners for tuning into this episode and for your feedback and support. If you're enjoying this show, I would be incredibly grateful if you could share this podcast with your family, friends, colleagues, and even fellow data enthusiasts. Subscribe or follow this podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, other podcast channels, or follow the LinkedIn group to stay up to date with the latest releases. If you are curious about me or my work in general, you can also check out my website or social media. Head to petermbach.com, my YouTube channel Peter Marcus Bach, that's Marcus with a C, or follow me on X at Peter M. Bach or Instagram at PeterMBach87. feel free to reach out to me with any feedback or guest suggestions so that I can keep improving this show. The podcast intro and outro song is called Starsky by Alex Kieran. Stay tuned for our next episode and next guest to hear how they are tackling the grand challenges.